He had the perfect life, the perfect job, and the perfect fiancée, a woman he called a real catch. To build her up, he had to tear his ex-wife down, painting her as a mousy, unambitious woman he'd thankfully outgrown. His friends believed him. His fiancée adored him, and his world was secure. But a single sun-drenched afternoon changed everything. One glimpse of his forgotten ex-wife standing on the deck of a billionaire's super yacht didn't just shatter his narrative, it exposed a lie so profound it threatened to destroy the perfect world he'd so carefully constructed. Ethan Vanderbilt moved through the world with the practiced ease of a man who believed in his own marketing. At 36, he was a senior vice president at a boutique investment firm, a position that sounded more impressive than it was, but afforded him a life of tailored suits, overpriced cocktails, and a carefully curated circle of acquaintances who reflected his own perceived success. He wasn't owed money, a fact that gnawed at him in quiet moments, but he had mastered the art of appearing as if he were. His charisma was a weapon, his smile a shield, and his new fiancée, Olivia Davies, was the crown jewel of his collection. Olivia was by all accounts flawless. She was 10 years younger, with a cascade of blonde hair that seemed to catch the light just so, and a laugh that tinkled like wind chimes. Her family, the Davies of Connecticut, had the kind of quiet, unstated wealth that Ethan craved. They had a summer home, not a beach house, and spoke of Europe in seasons, not cities. Olivia herself was sweet, perpetually agreeable, and looked at Ethan with a wide-eyed adoration that fed his ego like oxygen to a fire. To his friends, he described her as the total package, a real catch. It was a line he repeated often at dinner parties on the golf course and in the hushed, smoky corners of exclusive bars. But to truly appreciate the masterpiece that was Olivia, Ethan felt it was necessary to display the rough, discarded canvas of his past. That canvas was his ex-wife, Elara Walsh. In the 5 years since their divorce, Ethan had meticulously rewritten the history of their decade-long marriage. He painted a portrait of a woman who was sweet but simple, supportive but stagnant. Elara was comfortable. He'd tell his friends Liam Kennedy and Noah Sinclair over a game of squash. He'd pause, letting the word hang in the air, imbuing it with the weight of mediocrity. She was my starter wife. You know, the one you have when you're still figuring things out. She was content with our little rented apartment, her little admin job. She had no drive, no ambition well beyond me. Liam, a sturdy, good-natured architect who had known Ethan since college, would nod along, though a flicker of unease sometimes crossed his face. He remembered Elara differently. He remembered her quick wit, her fierce loyalty, the way she could gently deflate Ethan's ego with a single, well-placed joke. But Ethan was his friend, and loyalty was Liam's defining trait. Noah, on the other hand, was a journalist with a practiced cynicism. He'd watch Ethan perform his monologue, his eyes sharp and analytical. He found Ethan's constant need for validation tiresome. "What's she up to now?" Noah had asked once, a few years back. Ethan had shrugged, a perfect pantomime of detached benevolence. "Honestly, I have no idea. I made sure she was taken care of course." He'd lied. The divorce had been anything but generous. He had leveraged his financial acumen and Elara's emotional exhaustion to leave her with next to nothing. But we were just on different tracks. I was accelerating and she was parked. I hope she's happy, I really do. Probably still at that same desk making copies. This was the narrative he cemented, not just for his friends, but for Olivia. He needed her to understand the journey he had undertaken, the dead weight he had been forced to shed in order to become the man she deserved. I couldn't grow with her, he told Olivia one night, his voice a low, intimate murmur, as they lay in the bed of their gleaming minimalist apartment overlooking the city. It was like she was an anchor. I'd talk about wanting to take risks, to build something, and she'd just get this look on her face, fear. She was afraid of success. You thrive on it. You push me. You get it. Olivia, wrapped in his arms, felt a surge of pride. She was the one who got him. She was the dynamic, forward-moving partner he required. She had never met Alara, but the image Ethan painted was vivid, a mousy, timid woman in a beige cardigan, forever looking backward, while Ethan strode gallantly into the future. It was a sad story, and it made her love him all the more for having overcome it. The divorce itself had been a quiet affair, finalized on a grey Tuesday. Alara had been pale and silent, signing the papers with a hand that trembled slightly. Ethan had interpreted her silence as acquiescence, her weariness as defeat. He had taken the apartment, the savings, the momentum. He had left her with a few boxes of personal effects and a palpable sense of relief. He was free. He was ascending. He never looked back, because in his mind there was nothing there worth seeing. He was Ethan Vanderbilt, and his kingdom built on the ghost of a forgotten marriage was finally perfect. Ethan's campaign to establish Olivia as the ultimate human achievement was relentless and pervasive. It wasn't enough for his friends to simply meet her. They had to understand her significance, her value, her superiority in the grand narrative of his life. He wasn't just in love. He was a connoisseur who had acquired a priceless work of art, and he insisted on giving everyone a guided tour. The primary exhibition hall for this tour was the new apartment he and Olivia shared. It was a space that screamed new money, with stark white walls, a sprawling modular sofa, and a kitchen island the size of a small car. They hosted a dinner party, a housewarming of sorts. Liam and his wife Chloe came, as did Noah, who arrived stag and armed with a bottle of wine that was just expensive enough to be polite. Ethan was in his element, a conductor orchestrating the evening. "Liv, honey, tell them about the Nantucket fundraiser," he prompted, placing a proprietary hand on the small of her back. Olivia blushed prettily. "Oh, it was nothing, really. My mother ropes me into these things. We were just trying to raise some money for the children's literacy program." "Nothing," Ethan boomed, laughing, as if she'd told the most charmingly self-deprecating joke. "She raised over $200,000 in one night. The woman's a force of nature. She just has this grace. People want to be around her. It's a world away from what I was used to." He didn't say Alara's name, but he didn't have to. The ghost was always present, a convenient shadow that made Olivia's light seem all the brighter. Later, while Olivia was showing Chloe the apartment's walk-in closet, Ethan leaned in conspiratorially toward Liam and Noah. "See what I mean, class? It's effortless. Her family has a table at every important event. The connections are unbelievable. It's a different stratosphere. Remember those potlucks Alara used to host with what was it? The 7-layer dip?" Liam shifted uncomfortably. He remembered those potlucks. He remembered laughing so hard with Alara over a burned batch of brownies that he'd gotten tears in his eyes. He remembered the warmth and the lack of pretense, a stark contrast to the current sterile environment where he was afraid to set his glass down without a coaster. "They were fun, Ethan," he said mildly. Ethan waved a dismissive hand. "Fun for what they were. But this is the big leagues. Olivia understands the importance of image, of building a network. Alara just wanted to nest." The word was delivered like an epithet. Noah took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes missing nothing. He saw the way Olivia, upon rejoining them, glanced at Ethan for approval. He saw the subtle tension in her shoulders when Ethan launched into another story that began with, "I never could have done this before." He wondered if she ever got tired of being a walking, talking testament to her fiancé's upgrade. The campaign continued on the golf course a few weeks later. It was a Saturday, crisp and sunny. As they walked the fairway, Ethan was on a roll, complaining about a deal at work before seamlessly pivoting. "Thank God I have Liv to come home to. She just gets the pressure. We can talk for hours about strategy, about ambition. She's as sharp as I am." "That's great, man," Liam said, lining up his shot. "It's everything," Ethan insisted, his voice hardening slightly. "You have no idea what it's like to be with someone who doesn't get it. Someone who looks at your ambition like it's a flaw. Everything was a negotiation. Why do you have to work late? Why do we have to go to this networking event?" It was exhausting. Noah, who had been quiet for most of the game, finally spoke. "You know, I bumped into Alara's sister the other day at the market." Ethan's posture stiffened. "Oh, yeah. Yeah. Asked how Alara was doing. She said she was good, working on some new project. Sounded happy." A flicker of something dark and unpleasant crossed Ethan's face before being replaced by his usual mask of patronizing charm. "Good for her. I mean that. I hope she's doing okay. Probably still doing that little admin thing for that dental supply company. It suited her. Low stress, you know." He then turned to Liam. "Speaking of stress, you will not believe the hoops Liv is jumping through for this wedding. Her mother wants a full-string quartet." "A quartet. But hey, whatever my queen wants, she gets. She's a real catch. The real deal, worth every string." Liam and Noah exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance. It was a look that acknowledged the shared experience of listening to the Gospel of Olivia as delivered by its most fervent and perhaps most insecure preacher. Ethan saw himself as a man who had finally arrived, who had secured the perfect partner. But to Noah, it was beginning to sound less like a man celebrating his future and more like a man desperately trying to bury his past under an avalanche of praise. He was building a cathedral to his new life, but he never stopped checking to make sure the foundations laid over the ruins of his old one were still holding. The setting was St. Bart's, a jewel in the Caribbean. The occasion was Liam's 40th birthday, a milestone that demanded more than just a steak dinner back home. Liam, Chloe, Noah, and a few other friends had pooled their resources to charter a handsome 45-foot catamaran for a long weekend. Ethan, of course, had insisted on paying a larger share, a gesture that was less about generosity and more about asserting his status as the group's most successful member. The first day was idyllic, a perfect postcard of paradise. The turquoise water was bathtub warm, the sky an endless, cloudless blue. Champagne, personally selected by Ethan, flowed freely. Olivia was in her element, resplendent in a white bikini and oversized sunglasses, artfully composing selfies against the stunning backdrop. She laughed her tinkling laugh as Ethan regaled the group with a story about a hilarious mix-up with their reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant. A story whose sole purpose was to mention that they had been dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant. "To Liam," Ethan bellowed, raising his glass. 40 years young. He draped an arm around Olivia, pulling her close. "And to friends, old and new. I've got to say, life doesn't get much better than this." He surveyed the scene, the boat, the sea, the beautiful woman at his side, with the smug satisfaction of a king reviewing his domain. He felt invincible. It was in that precise moment of supreme self-satisfaction that it happened. Another vessel appeared on the horizon, moving with a silent, inexorable grace. To call it a boat was an insult. It was a super yacht, a floating palace of gleaming white fiberglass and tinted black glass, at least 200 feet long. It was a vision of obscene wealth, a behemoth that made their chartered catamaran feel like a child's bath toy. As it glided past, perhaps 100 yards away, the soft strains of sophisticated lounge music drifted across the water. Everyone on the catamaran fell silent, gawking. It was the kind of vessel they'd only ever seen in movies or on the Instagram feeds of celebrities. "My God," Chloe whispered, shielding her eyes. "Who even owns something like that?" Noah, ever the journalist, zoomed in with his phone camera. "Let's see if we can catch the name." But then he froze, his hand lowered slowly. "Forget the name," he said, his voice a low whistle. "You guys need to see this." On the sprawling aft deck of the super yacht, a small group of people were mingling, and standing among them, holding a champagne flute, was a woman. Her back was initially to them, but then she turned, throwing her head back, in a laugh that was silent from this distance, but clearly full of genuine mirth. She was wearing a simple navy blue sundress that fluttered in the sea breeze. Her auburn hair, which Ethan remembered her always pulling back in a severe practical bun, was down-styled in loose waves that caught the afternoon sun like fire. She wasn't just pretty, she was radiant luminous. She possessed an aura of unshakable confidence, a relaxed power that was more arresting than any conventional beauty. It was Alara Walsh. A man beside her, tall and elegantly dressed in linen trousers and a crisp shirt, placed a familiar proprietary arm around her waist. He leaned in and murmured something in her ear, and she smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. The man was Sebastian Thorne. Not just a rich man, but the rich man. A reclusive, almost mythical figure in the tech world who had revolutionized data security and was reportedly worth billions. He wasn't some paunchy old money inheritor. He was a contemporary titan, sharp and respected. On the catamaran, the party was over. The champagne in their glasses might as well have been vinegar. Liam's jaw was literally hanging open. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. Noah just stared, a slow, disbelieving grin spreading across his face. He lowered his phone and looked directly at Ethan. But it was Olivia's reaction that was the most telling. Her perfect smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of pure confusion. Her eyes darted from the impossible vision on the yacht to the face of her fiancé. Ethan stood as if he'd been turned to stone. The blood drained from his face, leaving his sun-kissed tan looking sallow and sick. His mind, usually so quick with a boast or a dismissal, was a blank, short-circuiting mess. He saw the woman. He saw the man. He saw the yacht and the carefully constructed kingdom he had built in his mind, with its narratives of superiority and its ghosts of mediocrity, was hit by a tidal wave. This wasn't the mousy, unambitious starter wife in a beige cardigan. This wasn't the woman who was afraid of success, who was content making copies at a dental supply company. This was a different person entirely. Or worse, this was the person she had been all along, and he had simply been too blind, too arrogant, too self-absorbed to see it. The silence on the boat was absolute, broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves. On the super yacht, Alara, blissfully unaware of her audience, turned with Sebastian Thorne and disappeared through a sliding glass door into the yacht's cool, impossibly luxurious interior. leaving a boatload of stunned spectators and one utterly humiliated man in her wake. The atmosphere on the catamaran for the rest of the afternoon was thick with unspoken thoughts. The sun still shone. The sea was still a brilliant turquoise, but the celebratory mood had evaporated, replaced by a tense, awkward silence. Ethan had retreated into a surly quiet, hiding behind his sunglasses and offering clipped one-word answers to any attempts at conversation. He nursed a single glass of champagne, his knuckles white around the stem. Olivia tried to salvage the day, attempting a light-hearted conversation with Chloe about wedding plans, but her voice lacked its usual effervescence. She kept casting worried, questioning glances at Ethan, who seemed to have erected an invisible wall around himself. She had witnessed him being smug, charming, arrogant, and passionate, but she had never before seen him look so small. The image of Alara so poised, so radiant, so clearly at home, in a world of unimaginable luxury, had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. The story she had been told about this woman suddenly felt thin, flimsy, like a script with a gaping plot hole. That evening, they had a reservation at a high-end restaurant built into the cliffside overlooking the harbor. The view was breathtaking, but the tension from the afternoon had followed them to shore. Everyone was making a strenuous effort to be normal, discussing Liam's birthday gift and the plan for the next day, but the conversation was stilted, punctuated by silences that were just a little too long. The elephant in the room wasn't just an elephant. It was a blue water super yacht. It was Noah, predictably, who decided to address it. He waited for a lull, then leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass with a calculated casualness. So, he began, his voice deceptively mild. "Wild seeing Alara today, huh? She seems to be doing exceptionally well for herself." Ethan, who had been pushing a piece of tuna around his plate, looked up. His eyes, when he finally met Noah's gaze, were cold with fury. "It's a flash in the pan," he snapped, his voice louder than intended, causing a nearby table to glance over. "Is it?" Noah pressed, undeterred. Sebastian Thorne doesn't exactly seem like the flash-in-the-pan type. The guy is practically a recluse. You don't see him splashing his flings all over the tabloids. "She's a gold digger." Ethan spat the venom in his voice, shocking everyone, most of all Olivia. "It's the oldest story in the book. A pretty woman finds a rich man to solve her problems. A guy like that gets bored easily. Trust me, I know her. She was never that interesting. She doesn't have the depth to keep a man like that entertained for long." The cruelty of his words hung in the air, ugly and stark. He wasn't just dismissing her success. He was actively trying to diminish her character, to paint her as manipulative and shallow. Liam, ever the peacemaker, tried to intervene. "Ethan, come on, man. Let's just drop it. We're here to celebrate." But Noah wasn't done. He wasn't being malicious. He was genuinely fascinated, a journalist pulling at a thread that was rapidly unraveling a much larger story. "I don't know Ethan," he countered, his tone now serious. "I didn't get gold digger from that. She didn't look like she was clinging to him. She looked powerful, happy, genuinely happy." He paused, then delivered the final blow. "She looked like she was finally in her element." The implication was clear. If that was her element, then what had her time with Ethan been? A cage? Olivia flinched as if she'd been struck. She looked at Ethan, at the ugly sneer on his face, and saw him through a new filter. She replayed his words in her head, not just from tonight, but from all the months they'd been together. "She was holding me back. She was afraid of success. She was a starter wife." Had Alara been holding him back, or had he been the one suppressing her? The confidence Alara exuded on that yacht was not something a person simply acquired overnight by latching onto a billionaire. It was the confidence of someone who knew her own worth. Where had that woman been during their marriage? And why had Ethan felt the need to paint such a pathetic, demeaning portrait of her? The cracks in Ethan's perfect facade were no longer just visible. They were beginning to splinter. Olivia felt a cold dread creep into her heart. She was engaged to a man who was either a terrible judge of character or a deliberate, cruel liar. For the first time, she started to wonder if she was the real catch, or if she was just the next woman auditioning for a role in a fantasy of Ethan's own creation, a fantasy that was rapidly colliding with a stunning and undeniable reality. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced pleasantries, but for Olivia and for the rest of the friends at the table, something had irrevocably broken. The weekend in St. Bart's ended not with a bang, but with a strained and hasty dispersal at the airport. The camaraderie was gone, replaced by a polite distance. Back home, the sighting of Ilara became a quiet obsession for the group, a puzzle they felt compelled to solve. The official story, as told by Ethan, had been so thoroughly debunked by that single radiant image that it created a vacuum, and they were desperate to fill it with the truth. It was Noah naturally who did the digging. As a journalist, he had access to research tools and a network of contacts that went beyond a simple Google search. He started with public records business filings and old university alumni newsletters. Liam, feeling a pang of guilt for his years of passive acceptance of Ethan's narrative, eagerly listened as Noah started to piece together the real story of Ilara Walsh's life post-divorce. What they uncovered wasn't a story of a woman who got lucky, but one of astonishing resilience and reinvention. "You're not going to believe this," Noah said to Liam over the phone a week later. "That little admin job at the dental supply company, she quit that 2 weeks after the divorce was final." According to Noah's research, Ilara had been utterly broken by the divorce. Ethan hadn't just left her, he had systematically dismantled her self-worth for years, convincing her that she was nothing without him. The divorce, where he had financially bled her dry, was the final devastating blow. For a few months, she drifted, staying with her sister, barely functioning. But then something shifted. It was a breakthrough born from hitting rock bottom. "Remember how she was always into art?" Noah asked. Ethan used to mock her for dragging him to those little indie galleries. Liam remembered. Ethan had called it Ilara's weird hobby. "Well," Noah continued, his voice filled with admiration, "she used the tiny bit of money she had left to enroll in a night course at the university. She went back to finish the degree she abandoned 20 years ago to put Ethan through his MBA program, a dual degree in art history and business administration." Ilara hadn't just finished her degree, she had excelled. She graduated with honors, focusing her final thesis on a burgeoning and widely misunderstood market, investment-grade, digital, and multimedia art. While the traditional art world was still skeptical, Ilara saw the future. She had a brilliant, intuitive eye for identifying emerging artists whose work had immense cultural and financial potential. After graduating, she started a small one-woman consultancy firm from her sister's spare bedroom. She called it Walsh Art Advisory. She wrote a blog that became a must-read for a niche group of tech-savvy art collectors. She was sharp, insightful, and her predictions on which artists were about to break out were uncannily accurate. The meeting with Sebastian Thorne was the pivotal moment, but it wasn't a chance encounter at a charity gala. Thorne, a known collector of unconventional assets, had been following her blog for months. He was deeply impressed by her intellect and her prescient analysis. He sought her out not as a potential date, but as a professional consultant. He invited her to be a keynote speaker at the exclusive Art and Algorithms Symposium he hosted annually in Geneva. That's where they met, Noah explained. She was on stage speaking to a room full of billionaires and tech moguls about the future of art curation. Thorne was in the front row. By all accounts, he was mesmerized, not by her looks, but by her brain. Their relationship began as a professional one. Thorne hired her firm to overhaul his private collection and advise on his personal art investments. He became her biggest client, and soon after her biggest champion. They discovered a shared passion not just for art, but for making it accessible. They believed technology could democratize the art world, and they began drafting a plan for a new kind of philanthropic entity. This led to the grand twist, the detail that made Ethan's gold digger theory so laughably, pathetically wrong. "She's not his girlfriend, Liam," Noah said, the revelation landing with the force of a bomb. "I mean, she is, but that's not the headline." About 6 months ago, they officially launched a joint venture. It's called the Thorne Walsh Foundation. It's a massive multi-billion-dollar philanthropic and art investment fund. And get this, Sebastian Thorne is the chairman, but Alara Walsh is the chief executive officer, the CEO. The superyacht wasn't just a pleasure craft. It was a floating headquarters, a mobile gallery they were using to host international artists, museum curators, and investors as they sailed through the Caribbean, building partnerships for the Foundation's first global initiative. Alara Walsh hadn't just fallen into a billionaire's arms. She had built her own empire, brick by painful brick. She had taken the ashes of the life Ethan had torched and created something magnificent from them. She wasn't arm candy. She was a partner, a visionary, a CEO, a powerhouse who had found a man not to save her, but one whose power and vision were a match for her own. The woman on the yacht hadn't just been happy, she had been home. The truth about Alara, the CEO, the visionary, the co-founder of the Thorne Walsh Foundation, spread through their social circle like a quiet, devastating seismic wave. It didn't just create cracks in Ethan's reputation, it triggered a full-scale demolition. Noah, feeling a certain grim satisfaction in revealing a truth so thoroughly concealed, made sure the key details reached not just Liam, but Chloe and the others from the St. Bart's trip. The information didn't just recontextualize Alara. It completely reframed their perception of Ethan. His years of condescending remarks, his dismissive hand waves, his pitying little anecdotes, they all now seemed like the desperate, pathetic actions of a man terrified by the potential of the woman he claimed to have outgrown. The most powerful aftershock, however, was building within the walls of Ethan's own home. Olivia had been a ghost since their return from the Caribbean, her usual adoration replaced by a cool, observational watchfulness that he found deeply unsettling. She was no longer his adoring audience. She was a detective, and he was her prime suspect. Late at night, after he was asleep, she would sit in the cold blue light of her tablet, tracing the digital breadcrumbs of Alara's past. She found the university's online archive and downloaded a copy of the thesis Alara had submitted, The Algorithmic Eye, Valuating and Curating Art in the Digital Age. As she read, a feeling of profound, sickening horror washed over her. The writing was brilliant, dense, prescient, and argued with a fierce intelligence. Alara had not only predicted the rise of blockchain-verified art 5 years before it became mainstream, but she had also built a compelling ethical framework for its curation. This was not the work of a mousy, unambitious woman. This was the work of a genius. Olivia's fingers trembled as she scrolled through page after page of incisive analysis, each sentence a fresh indictment of Ethan's lies. She felt a wave of nausea as she contrasted the powerful voice on the page with Ethan's sneering dismissal. She was sweet but simple. She had no drive. The final pieces of her disillusionment clicked into place. The confrontation, when it came, was not born of anger, but of a cold, hard certainty. She waited for him in the living room, the tablet resting on the coffee table between them like a piece of evidence. "I spoke to Chloe today," she began, her voice devoid of emotion. "She forwarded me an article about the Thorne-Walsh Foundation." She tapped the screen, and Alara's smiling professional headshot appeared next to Sebastian Thorne's. "It turns out your starter wife, the one you felt so sorry for, is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar philanthropic fund." Ethan, who had just poured himself a scotch, froze. He attempted his usual arsenal of deflection and charm. "Liv, honey, you can't be naive about this," he said, forcing a condescending chuckle. "It's a vanity title. A guy like Thorne does that for the woman he's with. He sets her up with a fancy title and a corner office to keep her happy. It's a gilded cage, nothing more. It's meaningless." "Is it?" Olivia countered, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "Because I read her thesis, Ethan. The one she wrote when she went back to school after you two divorced, the school she dropped out of 20 years ago to support you." She pushed the tablet across the table. "Read it. Tell me if the mind that produced that work is simple. Tell me if that woman is unambitious." He glanced at the title page and recoiled as if burned. He couldn't bring himself to read it. "This is ridiculous. You're letting this get to you. That life, that woman, it has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with us." Olivia's voice finally cracked with the weight of her fury and disappointment. "Our entire relationship, my entire understanding of you, is built on the story you told me about her, and it was all a lie. You didn't just lie to me, Ethan. You've been lying to yourself for years. You told me she was an anchor, that she was holding you back. But she wasn't, was she?" She stood up and began pacing, her movements sharp and agitated. "No, you were holding her back. You were so terrified that she might outshine you that you did everything in your power to convince her she couldn't. You clipped her wings, Ethan. You mocked her passions. You belittled her intelligence. You made her feel small so that you could feel big. That's not a marriage. That's psychological warfare. That's sabotage." His face, usually a mask of confident charm, began to crumble. "You don't understand," he stammered, his bravado failing him. "She had no confidence. I tried to help her. I tried to build her up." "No." Olivia spun on him, her eyes blazing. "You tried to keep her in a box you had built for her, and now you absolutely cannot stand that she found a way to break out of it and build a skyscraper of her own. You're not proud. You're not even angry. You're humiliated that the world can now see what you refuse to." His world was shrinking with terrifying speed. His calls to Liam now went straight to voicemail. Noah had simply unfollowed him on all social media. He was an island, and the tide was coming in. Desperate to regain control, to rewrite the ending of this disastrous chapter, he made a fatal error in judgment. He saw online that the Thorne-Walsh Foundation was hosting the opening of a new exhibition. Alara would be there. He would go. He would bump into her, be magnanimous and charming, the bigger person. He would show everyone, and most importantly himself, that he was unbothered, that her success was a quaint footnote he found amusing. It was a desperate last-ditch gamble by a man about to lose everything. The gallery was a different world, one of quiet power, old money, and new art. Ethan, in his slightly too shiny suit, felt a sheen of sweat on his brow. He felt like an intruder. He spotted her easily. She wasn't just in the room. She owned it. She was speaking with a white-haired museum director and a famous avant-garde artist, her gestures economical and confident, her laugh warm but authoritative. She radiated an energy that was both inspiring and intimidating. He hovered at the edge of the circle, waiting for his moment, a predator, stalking a creature that was no longer his prey. When the group dispersed, he moved in, plastering his most charming smile on his face. "Ella," he said, the old pet name, sounding alien and foolish in this sophisticated space. She turned. There was no shock, no anger, not even surprise in her eyes. There was only a faint, weary recognition, the look one gives an old, unpleasant memory that has briefly surfaced. "Ethan," she replied, her tone perfectly chillingly level. "Look at you," he said, gesturing vaguely at the priceless art on the walls. "This is quite something. I have to say, I'm so proud of what you've fallen into." It was the grenade he had chosen to roll at her feet, his last pathetic attempt to frame her success as dumb luck. Alara's polite expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened into chips of obsidian. She took a single deliberate step closer, invading his personal space and lowering her voice into a devastatingly calm indictment meant only for him. Fallen into, she repeated the words, precise and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "No, Ethan. I climbed. I climbed on my hands and knees out of the deep, dark hole you left me in. The hole you spent 10 years digging for me with your casual cruelty, your patronizing pats on the head, your condescension and your tiny, fragile ego that couldn't bear the thought of a woman who might be your equal." Ethan's smile evaporated. His face went numb. "You never saw me," she continued, her voice unwavering. "Because you never actually looked. You were too busy looking at your own reflection in my eyes, and you demanded that reflection be small and admiring at all times. You told our friends I was afraid of success. The truth is, you were terrified of mine." She paused, letting the words sink into his marrow. He stood there speechless, stripped bare under the unforgiving gallery lights. He was no longer Ethan Vanderbilt, the successful VP. He was just Alara Walsh's insecure ex-husband. "The greatest gift you ever gave me was signing those divorce papers," she concluded, her professional poise returning in an instant. "You didn't set me free. You unshackled me from the dead weight of your insecurity." She gave him a final dismissive glance. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have board members to speak to. I have work to do." Without a second glance, she turned her back on him and walked away, rejoining a circle of influential people who greeted her with warmth and respect. Ethan was left standing alone in the middle of a crowded room, a void in the sea of mingling guests. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him even if there were none. He was a statue of his own failure, a monument to a collapsed empire of lies. Ethan walked out of the gallery and into the cool night air, but he couldn't seem to get a full breath. The city's vibrant symphony, the blare of horns, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren sounded muffled and far away, as if he were underwater. He stumbled through the streets in a daze. Ilara's words echoing in his mind, each one a perfectly aimed stone, shattering the stained glass windows of his self-perception. "I climbed. Your tiny, fragile ego. You were too busy looking at your own reflection." He got into his car, a luxury sedan that suddenly felt like a cheap rental, and drove aimlessly. The glittering skyline of the city he had claimed to conquer now seemed to mock him, each light a reminder of a world he was no longer a part of. By the time he arrived back at the apartment, the sun was beginning to threaten the horizon, and he felt a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. The true consequences of his public unraveling began the next day. He saw a missed call and a text from Liam. "We need to talk. Call me." Steeling himself, Ethan made the call, hoping he could smooth things over, deploy the charm that had always been his salvation. "Hey man, about last night," Ethan started, but Liam cut him off. "I wasn't there, Ethan, but Chloe was," Liam said, his voice flat and heavy, stripped of its usual warmth. "She told me everything. Not just the confrontation, but the look on your face, the things you said." He paused, and Ethan could hear him take a deep, weary breath. "I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About all the years I just nodded along. I remember Elara, Ethan. I remember her quizzing you for your MBA exams at our old poker nights, making flashcards for you. You used to call her your rock. Then somewhere along the line, she became an anchor in your stories. I never questioned it, and that's on me, but I'm questioning it now." "Liam, it was complicated. You don't know the whole story. I know the story you told." Liam interrupted, his voice gaining a hard edge of conviction. "And it turns out that story was fiction, a fiction you needed to tell to make yourself the hero. I can't be friends with that man anymore, Ethan. I don't respect him." The line went dead, and with that click, a friendship of 2 decades was erased. Later, he saw a post from Noah on social media, a link to an article about narcissistic personalities with a simple cutting caption, "Some people build castles in the sky. Others build them on foundations of lies. Both are destined to collapse." It wasn't addressed to him, but it was aimed directly at his heart. The final, most devastating blow was waiting for him at home. He walked in to find 2 suitcases standing by the door like sentinels. Olivia was in the bedroom, not crying, but methodically emptying her drawers into a box. Her movements were calm, precise, and utterly final. "Liv, don't do this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. I know I messed up. I was wrong. Okay, I'll admit it. I'll do anything." She stopped and turned to face him, her eyes filled not with hatred, but with a profound and unshakable sadness. "There's nothing to fix, Ethan. You can't fix a foundation that was never there. Our entire relationship, this whole life we were planning, it was a fantasy. It was your revenge story." "No, that's not true. I love you," he insisted, taking a step towards her. "Do you?" she asked, her voice genuinely curious. "Or do you love that I'm not her? Do you love that my family has a respectable name? That I didn't challenge your ego? That I was happy to play the supporting role of the real catch?" "The engagement ring on my finger," she said, twisting it off and placing it gently on the dresser. "It never felt like a promise to me. It felt like a trophy you'd won for successfully escaping your past." He flinched as if struck. "Olivia, that's cruel." "No, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Cruel is what you did to her, and what I'm doing now is saving myself from being your next victim." She looked him directly in the eye. "Let's play this forward. What happens in 5 years when I decide I want to go back to law school or start my own company? What happens when I have an opinion that differs from yours, or a success that has nothing to do with you? Does my ambition suddenly become a problem? Do I become your new anchor? Do you start telling your friends that I've changed and that I'm difficult? I won't let you write my story, Ethan." and I certainly won't let you edit me down to a footnote in yours." She picked up the box and walked past him toward the door. He made one last, desperate attempt. "So that's it. You're just throwing it all away because of her?" Olivia paused at the door and turned a look of final, sorrowful clarity on her face. "That's where you're still wrong. This has nothing to do with her. This is about you. The tragedy is that you had a real catch once. A true partner, a brilliant mind, a woman who by all accounts loved you unconditionally, and you were too blind, too insecure, and too small to see it. You didn't outgrow her, Ethan. You were never big enough for her in the first place." She walked out of the apartment and closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing in the vast, silent space. He was finally truly alone in his kingdom, but the walls were gone, and the throne was ashes. The weeks that followed were a long, slow descent into a grey, featureless existence. The vibrant, impeccably designed apartment became his prison. The silence was deafening. He lost his edge at work. His charisma, which had been fueled by a superiority complex he no longer possessed, sputtered and died. He made sloppy mistakes, his confidence shattered. One evening, staring blankly at his tablet, he saw a new article. It was a feature in a global business journal about the Thorne Walsh Foundation's groundbreaking new platform. The main photo was a candid shot of Alara on a video call with her global team. She was laughing, pointing to a complex chart on a screen, clearly in command, respected and admired by the faces looking back at her. The final scene of the article described her on the deck of the yacht as the sun set. Sebastian Thorne brought her not champagne, but a thick binder of documents and a mug of tea. "The Zurich team is in," he'd said, his voice a low murmur of pride. "They're following your lead completely. You were right about the market timing." He squeezed her shoulder, a gesture of profound equal partnership. Ethan stared at the image, at the woman he had tried so hard to erase, now more vivid and powerful than he could have ever imagined. The starter wife, the anchor. She was navigating the world while he was adrift in an empty apartment. She had found a partner who saw her brilliance as an asset, not a threat. She had climbed out of the hole he had dug, and from the summit, she wasn't looking back. She was looking at the new dawn, and her entire world was bathed in light. And there you have it. A story about how the truth, like a powerful current, can rise up and wash away even the most carefully built empire of lies. Ethan thought he was trading up, but he was really just trading away his own chance at genuine connection, blinded by his own insecurity. Ilara's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Sometimes, the worst endings are actually the most liberating beginnings. What did you think of Ethan's downfall? Were you cheering for Ilara? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your take on these real-life dramas. If you don't want to miss our next story, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. Thanks for listening.